Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Going to talk about erections. Bismillah. Well, we've been kind of talking about some things in terms of just the basics of puberty. And one of the big ones, obviously, for boys is, and pardon the puns through this, they're not intended, big ones and large and and there's a lot of words that we will use. But just, and this is part of the as a reminder to start off, this is part of the importance of sharing knowledge properly, right? Unfortunately, we get too caught up in what we think in terms of language and words, and we don't really listen to what other people are saying. So in terms of erections, for example, right? There's a lot of lewd language that people can use to describe the penis, and we don't have to go into that. I mean, and it's young people, old people, whatever, depending on the situation, the conversation, people are going to use different words. Some people will use what's called innuendos, where they'll talk about things in terms of sexuality, for example, but without talking about sexuality. They'll make an offhand joke with the meaning to be about sex, but it's about something else. Now, as I was saying about the language part of it, is that we have to understand that just because somebody uses a particular word, and we may have a different understanding of that word, doesn't mean that our understanding is correct, right? So the most important thing is, as we go through this type of stuff, especially with using certain language, to understand that especially in different cultures, some words may appear lewd and obscene in one culture but not another, and that's why I was bringing this up, right? So the big reference is kind of an innuendo to, right, the male erection. Now, for the young brothers, inshallah, if anybody's listening, if the sister is going to be sharing this with her son, an erection basically is when your penis becomes hard. So it will stand up, right? Depending on, don't worry about the size issues here, guys, whatever you want to, right? You know what I mean? It's just, basically you get blood flow into the region of your penis, and it grows, right? Now, one of the things I think that's really important is then, and I don't know if mothers do this, and I think more, in my opinion, more mothers should, and I mentioned in a previous video that mothers should learn biology, at least the basics of the opposite gender. I mean, even as Muslims, it's important for us to try to understand each other as much as possible. So a man should understand the nature of women as best they can. They should understand the biology, even just the basic biology. Doesn't mean you have to become a doctor and an expert on everything, but understand the basic biology of women in terms of what the differences are between men and women, right? We all come from the same source. In terms of embryology, you have the egg or the ovum, but we call it the egg, and then you have the sperm, and they come together, and this new life has tissue, and that tissue grows. For example, in terms of the male, the tissue, depending on what's present during the fertilization, chromosomes, proteins, hormones, all of these kind of things can influence. So, for example, when there's I believe it's a particular protein, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but there's a particular protein that, if it is present, it can cause the this particular part of tissue in the embryo to form into the penis, right? And if it's not, it turns into what's known as the clitoris, right? And people don't always realize this, but I mean, you could technically, and there are people in the past who have used the terminology that the clitoris is the female penis, right? There's a lot of similarities in terms of the tissue structure, the appearance of it. If you see it completely through, let's say, medical textbooks or illustrations and so on, it looks very, very similar to the structure and the shape look very similar. Now, obviously, they function different. There are some functional differences as well. But so in the case of the the young brothers, you have a penis, right? And the sisters know this. And then if you happen to be in the situation, or even as a mother, when your child is small, having a basic understanding of the anatomy of a man, if you notice something, even with a small boy, it happens all the time. They fall. I've known many boys that when they start learning to, especially in Western culture, it's a little bit different, because in the Muslim culture, we teach our boys to sit when they go to the bathroom. Western boys are not always taught this. We're usually taught to stand. And I have heard this incident so many times. When a young boy is standing, he's not quite tall enough to get over the toilet seat. So they lift the seat up. And the young brother, little child, is going to the bathroom, and that seat, sorry for the loud noise, but you get the idea. I believe it happened to me as well. So traumatic. I mean, maybe that's the first memory I have, but it's not. But these kind of things happen, right? So in this particular case, I mean, a mother needs to know the basic anatomy to see, okay, is everything looking the way it should, right? There's differences between whether you're circumcised and not circumcised, and as Muslims, we circumcise. So this is important as well to know the difference too, because it happens very often when young brothers will see somebody who's different, let's say accidentally through school, through change rooms, through athletics, whatever. They may not be aware of this, and people are not aware of how visually different a circumcised penis from an uncircumcised penis is. Now, in terms of just the general appearance, functionally they're the same, right? But so for the young brothers, right, you should understand the basics, that you have what's called the glans, or the head of the penis. That's the ball-shaped, how do you say, the ball-shaped head at the head. Yeah, even this is a little awkward. I'm just talking by myself. So I mean, you can see how this can be awkward, but just think of it as just like, anything else. So let's do it this way, I guess, to make it easy, right? So there's a head at the top, and then you have a shaft, and at the bottom you have what's called the scrotum, which is the little sac at the bottom. And the sac actually is one of the scrotum. Inside of that is the testicles, okay? And this is a very, very sensitive area, right? So it's important to you don't have to go into the biology on the inside. Now, one other important thing is that with the penis is that you have a little hole at the end of the head, which is what's called the urethra, right? And boys learn this very early on, is that we urinate, we pee through this, right? So it's a simple thing. It happens. You go to the bathroom. That's where it comes out. But the difference between boys and girls is that boys have from the scrotum, the testicles, you also have something else that's called semen, that is what produces sperm. Sorry, I shouldn't say produces sperm. How do I say that? I'm trying to say this in a way that's not so. I don't want to get too medical. I mean, I could go very medical in it, and I don't want to. The intention is to keep it kind of casual so that people can get the understanding. But basically, it's a fluid that contains sperm, and that sperm looks like it's a similar thing actually. The head of it looks kind of like the head of a penis, and it has a little tail, like a little. If anybody ever sees a tadpole in the water, a tadpole or a small frog, it looks very similar in that sense. And that through sexuality, we won't go into the details about this for now, but basically through sex and intimacy, that gets transferred into the young brother's wife once he gets married, and then that's where babies come from. Yeah, you know how confused people would be if that was the story, but that's just to get the idea. So anyway, this is where that fluid comes from, right? That's the focus right now. We'll talk about the other things later, the more the details of that. But the idea is that you don't have to be worried about these types of things when you start seeing. The reason I'm telling you this is because as a boy starts to go through puberty, and we mentioned this in the last one, you will get something that's called pre-ejaculate, right? And what this means is it's like a clear fluid that comes out, and you'll notice it's different, okay? and it comes from the same place. So when a boy starts to go through puberty, this might start to happen, especially after you have an erection. So when the blood flows to the region, your penis gets hard and it stands up and it grows in size. And it can be very uncomfortable and awkward at the beginning. It can be very embarrassing, and as I mentioned in a previous video, a good thing to do is just cover up, get in the habit of wearing kind of, baggier shirts and so on. And then if it happens in public, because it will happen in public, it's just the air blows and young brothers get an erection, right? This is what happens, right? This is just part of going through the process. So if it happens in particular areas where you get an erection, don't feel uncomfortable. Don't get all embarrassed about it, and I'm not going to touch on the issue of a particular topic of the homosexuality, but unfortunately there is this kind of idea that just because you get an erection around other boys doesn't make you a homosexual. Doesn't mean you're attracted to men and that is your interest. When you are going through puberty, as I said, the wind can blow, and you can be anywhere at any time. You could be sitting in math class and get an erection. And this does not mean that you're turned on or excited by math. This is just your body is adjusting. I mean, as you get older, you will be stimulated or excited based on different things. But when you first start going through puberty, there's no real relation between when this happens. Not really. Right? Some people will say that it is, but that's not true at all. So if you happen to be somewhere, don't get confused at the fact that why did it happen here? Don't get worried about those kind of things. Just it happens. It's normal. It's natural, and it's okay. Now, as going back to the initial fluid thing, is you will get a small amount of what's called ejaculate, pre-ejaculate, and it's generally a clear fluid. And it's important as you get older, too, from a health standpoint, to understand the differences between how the fluid should look, right? And I'm saying fluid because these are the medical terms. We'll get into more of the emotional, intimate type details of how you feel and these kind of things later, so that you can help to understand to deal with them. But right now we're focusing on the biological, medical side of it. So the fluid could look very clear. Now, when this happens, as a Muslim, so now we're going to get into a little bit of the spiritual stuff. As a Muslim, when you start to get this happening, something else I should have mentioned actually too, just to step back, is that once you start hitting puberty, once you start noticing these physical changes, right? And obviously when a boy gets his first erection, you know that you are going through puberty, for example, because sometimes people don't always know, right? But this is a clear sign that you're starting puberty for sure, right? But then when you, as a Muslim, as a young Muslim, you are now accountable for your actions. Now you are supposed to, because you're a young man, you're supposed to be taking charge and you're supposed to be taking responsibility. This doesn't mean that you have to all of a sudden get out and get a job and get married and all of these kind of things. That's not what we're talking about. But you are starting to be, prior to that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't hold you accountable for a lot of the mistakes that you make because of the fact that you are still learning, right? But now as a young adult, you are going to start to be accountable. And one of those things is that you have to start praying. Some people will argue about, based on a hadith that says that you should start getting your children to pray around 7 and to be physical with them. I hold this position based on my teachers that this hadith is not. There's a lot of problems with the hadith in terms of it's isnad and so on, that it's weak. It contradicts a lot of other teachings that the Prophet had said. So basically, the general understanding is that a young man becomes accountable and has to start praying and start doing certain things in terms of being a young Muslim man when they start going through puberty. Now, this ejaculate is important. This pre-ejaculate is important because, inshallah, God willing, you're not engaging in sexual activity with people as you shouldn't, because you're not ready. There's a whole bunch of things that we can talk about later. But you will get this pre-ejaculate. And this pre-ejaculate is a clear fluid. And when this happens, if your parents, hopefully, inshallah, had taught you that when you pray, before you pray, you have to do wudu. Okay? But when this pre-ejaculate comes out, you have to do what's called a ghusl. Right? Or it's more of a ritual bathing, meaning you have to clean the area with water, and then you do wudu and you bathe, right? So you clean that way. And this is important to note that when this happens, when you're a young man, if this is happening a lot, now it becomes very difficult for a young man to have to clean all the time or bathe. Let's say you're at school, for example, and you get an erection in class, and you find that you have that little bit of liquid. You have to go to the bathroom, and you find that afterwards you have that pre-ejaculate. Or you may find a little bit of white, flaky, it looks white and flaky, let's say, in your underwear, for example, right? This is what it dries out, and it's a little bit of white and flaky. Now, there's two things that you would need to do here in terms of spirituality. And so the reason this is important is so that you can pray, and you can spiritually clean, physically clean. Now, the way it works is that we do have evidence that because this is happening, and if you're a young man and this is happening a lot, it becomes very difficult for you to have a full bath all the time. So what you can do is just you clean the area like you normally would after you go to the bathroom with some water, some tissue, however you're taught to clean. Ideally, you clean it with some paper, toilet paper, and then a little bit of water to clean off and rinse off any of the residue. And in case of if you get any of the dry, flaky material on your underwear, you can either wash it with water, or you can just, if it's dry, you can just scratch it off. And we have authentic hadith that tell us this. And people might get a little upset. Well, why do we have hadith like this? And something that's important about these is that it's to show us that, because there's such an emphasis placed on our prayer, that the Prophet ﷺ doesn't want to create this environment where people are freaking out. All of my prayers are invalid because I'm a teenager and I'm going through this and I'm constantly having this issue. I believe it was Ali ibn Abu Talib, one of the great caliphs of our ummah, one of the greatest leaders in the history of Islam. He approached the Prophet with this. He was a young man and he went through this and he had this difficulty and he said, do I have to bathe all the time? This is happening to me all the time. So he was having pre-ejaculate, so it breaks his wudu, and now he has a problem for us. And the Prophet said, no. If this is something that's happening that much, you can just do wudu, clean the area and do wudu, because it's too difficult and too much hardship for you to have a complete bath every time. So this is one of the beauties of Islam, right? So the Prophet teaches us these things, not to be vulgar or not to be disgusting, but to teach us that it's okay, right? If you have a little bit of the ejaculate and you're not able to have a full bath and you have to pray, just clean the best you can in the area, and then you do wudu. And if you have any of the white dried residue from it afterwards, and you're not in a situation to wash your underwear, you can scratch it off. You can, right? We have Aisha had taught this, and also with the water, right? We have a hadith in which the Prophet Aisha had said that she had cleaned some semen off of his clothes, right? This is after something else. We'll get into that later. But she said she washed it, and the clothes were still wet when he put them on and left. And one of the amazing things that I find with this hadith is this is to show us, don't freak out. It's okay. If this happens, it's very simple to deal with. You can scrape it off, or you can just wash it, right? And it doesn't have to be this big complex thing. And people mistake this for something lewd and vulgar. But the reality is it's to teach us that exactly to combat that type of attitude. From my perspective, that's what I believe. That's one of the great lessons from these hadith. It's to teach us it's okay. Don't freak out. It's not what you think. There's an easy way around it. This is how you do it, because people will be like, oh my God, subhanAllah, all of my prayers are invalid, right? So this is why this is important. Now, this video is a little longer than planned, but one other thing that we'll talk about very, very quickly that falls into the same category to a certain degree is what's called nocturnal emissions, or what is known as more casual slang as a wet dream. And as you start going through puberty, this is, again, something that happens. It can happen in adults, right? It just doesn't happen as often. So this is the difficulty for the young brothers, is that you are less prepared for these things. because you've never gone through it, you haven't experienced it, but you get the bulk of these strange sudden erections. You get wet dreams a lot more often than an older male would, and that's just one of the challenges, I guess, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put out there, right? Because if an older man was having wet dreams, he understands what they are. He understands what the erections are. Do you know what I'm saying? So unfortunately, you guys have to go through this little challenge. But a wet dream, basically, same place, right? Same hole, the urethra at the head of your penis, the semen will come out, and it's much thicker, and it's much heavier, and it's much messier, right? It's like very, very thick cream. I wouldn't say like yogurt, because it's kind of so this is something that's interesting. I mean, you could go on a whole topic with just this, but this is what it goes back to what I said before, with it understanding how it should be, or the way it should look, is actually very important for the health of a young man. Because if you have an illness or some sort of infection, astaghfirullah, if, you know, sexually transmitted disease, for example, you can notice some of the effects on your semen. If you're dehydrated, right, you notice when you go to the bathroom, there's a different color in your urine. It can be very clear, it can be very dark. These are signs of a number of things. One is lack of fluid, so dehydration. It could be lack of certain vitamins and minerals and so on. If you're overhydrated, having too much water in your body, it can be very, very clear because you're urinating too much and so on. But that doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong. It's just that's the way the body is. At certain times, things change. And the semen is the same. So as I said, you have the pre-ejaculate, which is usually very clear looking, and then you have the thicker nocturnal emissions, right? This generally will happen for whatever's going on. You're having a dream, whatever. Most of the time, people don't remember it. You just wake up and you notice that you have an erection and that there's some fluid there, some sticky fluid. So all you have to do from a religious standpoint, don't freak out. Just go to the bathroom, take off your clothes, have a bath if you can. Ideally, you should really try to. I mean, let's say you wake up and Salah is just going to end, for example, and this has happened, right? You do have options, but generally you have to have a bath or a shower. In modern terms, I don't think a lot of people have baths nowadays, but generally it's the same as the nocturnal emission. You clean the area and you wash any of the fluid off, any of the semen that has come out, and you do wudu, and then you pray. And this is what's important in this. So don't get caught up and get all worked up over the fact that you had a wet dream, right? It's normal, it's natural. It's going to shock you the first time it happens. It might shock you the first few times, especially if you're not taught this. So inshallah, you'll understand that this is a, you know, and we can go into more details in this. If anybody has any questions and wants to talk about this privately, we can talk about it. But this is again, I'm going to keep emphasizing this. We're talking about this from a casual standpoint. These are normal, natural things. My understanding is that even women have nocturnal emissions. They have fluid that comes out. Again, this is important for mothers in particular to understand. It's surprising, and I was shocked about this, how many women don't know about their own private parts, their vagina, and the differences between the boys and the girls. I mean, I've heard adults even who believe and didn't know it until they were told this, that they thought that they urinated from the vagina itself. And I should actually correct that, because the vagina, unfortunately, is the hole of a woman, which is where the sexual act of intimacy happens, right? The whole area, the private parts, the genitals of a woman consist of a number of parts. And as we already said in this video, they have a clitoris, which is similar to the penis. One of the big differences is the fact that instead of having a hole in the clitoris, it's below the clitoris. And that's where they urinate. That's where the urethra is. That's where the urine comes from. And then below that is the vagina itself. And this is where sexual intimacy occurs between a husband and a wife, and where, inshallah, the baby will come out, right? So it's important to understand these things, but I am shocked at how many women don't even know this about themselves, because it's important, because you get different, you know, as I said, you can have health issues, and understanding this can go a long way to help these things. So inshallah, this will be helpful. Hopefully it was a little bit interesting and different, and we'll see how these go. I mean, I don't know. I haven't posted these yet, so we don't know how they're going to be. But if you want to continue the conversation, keep it below, keep it, avoid all the lewdness. As I had mentioned previously, input's welcome, but I will monitor. I will delete anything that's inappropriate. So think about your words. Think about if you want to ask questions. Think about them. Ask them in a professional way. If you're not sure about it, we can arrange to send me a private message through email or whatever, and I can give you some information on that. And as I said, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a sexual therapist. I'm just sharing the basics that all of us should know in terms of how our bodies work and function. Also, too, if you want to help support us on Patreon, $1 a month or whatever you can, or more if you can. And this helps to continue with the quality, to the production, and many other things to continue doing these things. And your support is really, really needed. And you can find the Patreon details in the video description below. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.